Hello and welcome to What's Next, and this episode, which is part of our 514 special series entitled Reflection on Change, Progress, Challenges and Resilience and Reform. I'm Holly Kirkpatrick, and in this episode we're focusing on reform. It's been 2 years since the 514 racist attack that took the lives of 10 people at the Tops grocery store on Buffalo's Jefferson Avenue. Let's take a moment to remember and say the names of those people just at the top of the show. They are Roberta Drury, Margus Morrison, Andre McNeil, Aaron Salter, Geraldine Talley, Celestine Cheney, Haywood Patterson, Catherine Massey, Pearl Young, and Ruth Whitfield. They were the people that lost their lives on May 14th, 2022. I'm joined today in the studio by 6 individuals who are all officially trailblazers. Indeed, the Erie County Commission on the Status of Women named each of our guests a living trailblazing woman earlier this year. WBFO has gathered all of them together in one place to talk about reform in the wake of 514. We'll discuss what each of our guests think is necessary for reforming Buffalo's East Side and beyond into a thriving ecosystem for its residents. First, here's a quick intro of who's who. So we have Courtney Copeland, hello, a licensed clinical mental health counsellor and current doctoral student in psychology at University at Buffalo. She's also a mental health advocate and a Seneca Nation community member. Welcome, Courtney.
Thank you for having us, Holly.
Okay, we have up here Akua Menz-Edu, president of Clementine Gold Group, an equity centre and equity-centred strategy and planning firm, and she's also a Cornell certified diversity professional. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, we have over here Kimberly. Hi, Kimberly. Kimberly Johnson, Senior Billing Account Clerk for the Erie County Probation Department. She also served on the 514 Survivors Fund Steering Committee, and she was appointed by Buffalo Mayor Byron Brown to the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library Board of Trustees, where she served as board chair since 2022. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you.
And then we have over here Sophia Roberts, hello, the Regional Coordinator for the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State, known as SANIS, an organisation founded by and led by people with developmental disabilities for people with developmental disabilities. Hello, Sophia.
Hi.
We have Kelly Marie Wofford, Director of Health Equity at the Erie County Office of Health Equity, founder and principal of Front Seat Life, LLC, an organisation dedicated to helping women and communities of colour address mental health. Welcome, Kelly Marie.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Bridget Jaipal Valenza, an award-winning journalist, certified paralegal, and managing editor here at WBFO, which means that, yes, she's my boss. Let's not mess this up, hey, Bridget. So, hi, Bridget.
Hello, Holly.
So thank you everybody for joining me to talk about reform on Buffalo's East Side and beyond today, 2 years on from 514. First, we're going to start pretty broadly to make sure that we have a few definitions set straight amongst us. So reform, what does that mean to you? Does anybody want to volunteer to kick us off? Okay, go for it, Courtney.
I can go first. I think that a lot of times we speak about how systems are broken, but I actually believe that the systems are functioning in the exact way that they were designed to do so. And I think reform is, as we continue to recognize the humanity in our neighbors more and more, we're moving towards systems that actually function in the benefit of each of us instead of for the subjugation of most.
Bridget, anything you want to add?
Not to that. That's an amazing answer.
Thank you. There you go.
That's it right there. Reform to me is studying a process and the way it works currently, assessing whether or not it is serving your needs, and if it isn't, adjusting to when it does. So fairly simple, but often very difficult because it takes an extreme amount of self-reflection. So,
Sophia.
Yeah, I just think of the word action. You know, it's not just talking about things or thinking about. I think talking and thinking is really important, but doing, reforming,
Akua?
Yeah, I would say that when I think of like the word equity, its connection to reform and it's removing the predictability of failure or success based on social factors. And so I come from a healthcare background, and we often talk about things like the social determinants of health. Half of those social determinants are made up of specific economic factors. The other are more social factors in terms of how people approach total health. And so when you remove the predictability of failure or success based on those social factors, that's when we really get into a place of reformation from that standpoint.
Kelly Marie.
I mean, I can add to it for the sake of adding and being a part of this part of the conversation, but I don't have anything to contribute different than what's already been spoken.
Okay.
So I'm good with where we stand on reform.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about you, Kimberly?
I agree with Kelly in that the statements made here are very concise to what I believe would be reform in the broad sense of what we're talking about here today. And if I can just say, expounding upon that is just improving, for the better or the greater good, reform or improving the status of what we're standing on.
What a great start. Okay, this is a strong start. So, next up is, in your respective industries, if you like, or areas of expertise and perspectives, has any reform happened in the last 2 years since 514? Has anything come to pass in terms of reform? Ekua, you're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of conversations, obviously, that have happened since 514, and folks really honing in on 513 and before, right? So what even got us to that point in the first place? And so I think there's a lot of organizations and people that are now thinking about systems change from that vantage point. It wasn't necessarily thought about beforehand, right? Or at least maybe in different pockets, but not in a concise way like people are thinking about it now. I think that there's different reformation that's happening in specific industries. There's a lot of conversation right now in the transportation space. There's a project that we're involved in with Buffalo's Clean Mobility Initiative, and that's on the east side. It's focused on really addressing the gaps in the systems, also bringing more opportunities to people on Buffalo's east side. And so there's a lot of conversations and funding through NYSERDA at the state level. So that's one specific area that I can pinpoint just because, I'm connected to that initiative. But in terms of some of the others, I know there's a lot of conversations. I can't speak to all of those.
Anything else bringing to mind in terms of reform in your respective industries? Kelly Marie, how about you?
In two spaces, mental health and government. I think when it comes to mental health, the conversation, not just because of 514 and the days, months, centuries prior to 514, but we are at a place where I believe the conversation around mental health is changing. When we look at COVID and the impacts of COVID as well, so that was a worldwide phenomenon. But so is 514, a very large example to us here in Buffalo, but on the world stage, a very small example of what communities are dealing with all of the time, right? And so when we look at what's changing, I believe that on a larger scale, it's another piece of the puzzle and conversation when it comes to what needs to change, right? There's so many pieces that fit perfectly in place because they were supposed to, because that's the way the system was built. And we are now having conversations and documenting so that we can take action when it comes to the next piece of the puzzle. So yes, we're centered on the remembrance of the people that we lost, and remembrance and honoring those that are still living through that very real moment in time for themselves. And then us as a Black community, us as an East Side community, us as a Buffalo community, us as an Erie County community, What has changed is the acknowledgement, I believe, and awareness that all of these pieces are interconnected.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was very much, this is my side, this is your side, this is, but 514 for Buffalo in Western New York, I believe, put a very realness for everyone, because it's very real for many people in our community, but it became very real to others who believed something like a racist attack on Black folks could never happen, and also never happen here. So we are now in this place of realness and awareness that yes, it happens. I would say everyone on this panel knew that before 514. However, for those that didn't see it, didn't understand it, thought this was a bygone, time of yesteryear, they now know or choose to ignore that this is a very real place that we all live in.
Okay. Kimberly. Thank you.
I'm going to dip into where Kelly was, because I see 514 as the awakening. Okay, because not only were we awake that this could happen, and like you said, some of us already knew that this was very possible. I think there was a lot of denial around this situation that it could not happen, and that's why it was easy for that to happen. But when we bridge forward, I feel like more than just that community has been awakened, because they've been awake, they've been in there all along. Okay, and I feel that now there has been a light that's been shined on this area, on the east side of Buffalo, which some people have to say, okay, why hasn't something else? Why did it take this for so much now to be poured in it? It was almost an overpour of attention to the situation, and a lot of opportunity for people to get in and say, oh, I'm going to, but to continue it and make sure that we were setting a seed that was going to thrive, to make sure that this community, this city, this county, if you will continue to recognize this area of Buffalo as an area that needs to be fortified and fed and watered for reform, if you will, to grow. And we're behind the 8 ball on that. We recognize now, we're awake enough to know that we're behind the 8 ball for that area. That area has consistently fell short of its just due in attention. And now that it has happened, and I think that a lot of opportunities have grown out of it. I think a lot of for it to be such a tragic situation, there has been a lot of solid growth out of it. But there's so much more that can be done. But the start is there, and I think that the necessaries or the necessary hands that need to be in it are in it and trying to do. But can we say for sure that there's a plan? No, I can't speak to an absolute plan. But I always said to a few of my friends that, this light that is shined on Buffalo right now, we need to take that ball and run with it. Not to capitalize on something so tragic, but to capitalize on something that was so tragic and feed our people that way. Like you said, there's only one grocery store. It was there before he came. Before he came and scoped it out, there was still only one grocery store there. There was a food desert there. Why is that? And if I go on, the library is the only one there. Okay, that is a resource center. Okay, and became almost ground zero for them when it happened, because they needed some place to set up, just central.
And that's the Frankie Merriweather.
The Frankie Merriweather,
Jefferson,
yes,
yeah.
yes. We have to get back to basics and treat everyone in this situation as important. And they didn't feel that way in that area. I grew up there. I don't live there anymore, but it is not what it was. You know what I'm saying? But again, the light has been shown. The light has been shown. So where are we going with this? It's definitely a question and a conversation that needs to not only start, continue, and also be 2 steps ahead.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything to add in terms of has any reform happened in the last 2 years in your respective industries or area of expertise? Courtney?
I think I would like to highlight feeling, this is just me personally, feeling that the most reform so far has come from the actual community. I think that the community has been the most resilient, the most action-based, the most forward-stepping in navigating after this situation. Just to give a quick anecdote, well, both my grandmothers are from Cold Springs, and my one grandmother is a member of a church that is down the street from the Tops, and has been my entire life. That's the church I was saved in. But she changed the direction that she went home. She didn't even want to drive past the Tops for literally months. And it's the only way that I was able to get her to look at the Tops was because of the Friday Night Live events that happened. And she said, Courtney, this is my first time even being over this side or this part of Jefferson since everything happened. And that was organized by the community.
So those events, just put those into context, what were the Friday Night Live?
They were, it was organizers from the community that came together and had celebrations on Fridays, and they had music, they had community resources, they had food, they had things for it was an opportunity for vendors, an opportunity for the community to get together and collectively celebrate where they are from. It was also, to me, the most healing that the community has had since. I was really looking at Juneteenth as being my opportunity to be around community and heal, but the Friday Night Live events gave me that collective community healing feeling that I have not experienced anywhere else.
Thank you. So, talking a little bit more specifically now with some of your respective industries, we're going to talk about the workplace. So 514, as Kimberly said, it kind of shone a light on many things that many people already knew about the East Side, particularly when it came to inequities in the years of policy and financial neglect on the East Side, and that resulting and continuing racial segregation that exists in Buffalo. It meant that it kind of nudged conversations about race and racial inequity into the workplace. And in media in particular, there was a lot of dialogue here about the lack of reporters of colour that were around to report on 514 or what happened. So Bridget, as the leader of a newsroom, and my boss, how have you tried to ensure that the newsroom, our newsroom, reflects the community that it serves and represents the community that it serves?
So it's a double-edged sword in media, in journalism. We trust journalists to tell accurate stories. We trust journalists to really give us this complete vision of an area on the topics that they're reporting on. You, in theory, then, can send any reporter to do any story at any time. But I really needed to take a moment and take a step back and think about my people who I had at the time and how they would be able to do this job. Because you're talking about walking into a community that has suffered a tragedy like no other. There's no blueprint for it here, thank goodness. But it really was this racial divide. And our building came to a bit of a reckoning with that because we didn't. And to this day, I'm still the senior most person of color who makes any sort of editorial decisions and on what we cover. And it is a lone voice. It's not like I don't have supporters, but I find myself in a very unique position here. And it's one where I have to straddle that line all the time to being accountable to my supervisors and my bosses, and to the community that I serve. And it isn't easy because, you know what, nobody's happy. No matter what you do, somebody's unhappy with something. But in that instance, I find that I have to stay true to myself and to what I feel is right and the direction that is the most positive that we can go in for a community in order to help them. I frequently said that the community knows what they need. Mm-hmm. They know exactly what they need. They know exactly what they want. They know exactly, for the most part, how to get it. There are structures in place that simply make that impossible. And so finding those structures, whether you are a reporter of color or not, became my focus because you didn't need a color to be able to tell that story. Mm-hmm. You don't need a color to be able to tell a story and be empathetic and listen to a person, whether you agree with their politics, whether you agree with their sexual orientation, whatever. It truly doesn't matter. You're talking human being to human being. So that story will always have that hook. And that's what I look for in my journalists. So that's why I felt comfortable sending them out to do these stories. Because we do have empathy. We are all human beings. And we can all tell that story. It's difficult though. I mean, Trailblazing Women, I'm the first of my kind editorially here in this building. I'm hoping that I'm not the last of my kind, certainly. But yeah, that's something that people have to reckon with. DEI was a great thing, and now suddenly it's turning into not a great thing so much.
Well,
so
let's take that actually, because Ekua, I know that you have lots of experience within the workplace and DEI strategies and their implementation and their existence. And as Bridget said, in certain states and Texas, I believe, that's not only under threat, it's being wiped out, those kinds of initiatives and strategies. So what challenges do you face regarding diversity, equity and inclusion strategies in the workplace? Or what did this shine a spotlight 514 on those kinds of conversations in the workplace?
For sure. You know, I think we often talk about 2020 as this racial reckoning that was happening in the country after George Floyd's murder, right? And so a lot of conversations were happening around that. So all these organizations, you see some of the larger organizations making these statements. A lot of folks really putting the stake in the ground to say, hey, we're going to do something about this. We're directing resources directly to specific racial programming or, you know, scholarships and the like. But what we found is, you know, May 14th was our second reckoning around some of the racial things that were happening, specific to the incident and tragedy that happened here in Buffalo. And so from an organizational standpoint, at that time I was still working within healthcare, but doing some consulting on the side before I left that role. So the conversations that we were having were really in the midst of, you know, needing to activate at that point in time. So organizations were like, oh my gosh, you know, we're doubling down, we're gonna put some resources there. You saw folks coming together to volunteer, you know, collect resources, really be in the community. But the question that we often had was, okay, when the cameras leave, now what? What is that going to look like for organizations? And I can say that there are still many organizations that have some sort of DEI programming, but there's many who have started to quiet down. You've seen that, right? I think that because of the political atmosphere that's happening right now, DEI has been co-opted by certain, groups, and so they're talking about DEI as, I've heard terms like DEI means didn't earn it, or DEI means you're woke of some sort, right? And you're starting to hear a lot of that type of rhetoric. But the reality is, the conversations that we've had with organizations is how do we really get to the basics so that people understand what DEI does on a day-to-day basis, right? So when you're talking about equity, what do you really mean? How does that impact me in my day-to-day job and recourse? And so we've talked about a rebrand of some sort, right? Like, this is modern day civil rights. When you look at a lot of these civil rights movements that have happened beforehand, it's hard to really argue against them, even though those are conversations that we're still having. So I think at this point in time, we see organizations really trying to shape this work in a way. You hear different terms like, oh, we're going to call it respectable workplace, or, we're putting this back under HR. But there's still some organizations that are saying, no, this is what we're going to do. We're going to really look at demographic data and base our decisions off of data, and making just basic updates in terms of organizations. So I think, there's a sway of what is happening around DEI, but there's a lot of organizations that are now going to the next level and saying, okay, this is how we're going to shape this so that more people will actively participate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm aware that we've got quite a few people in here who have mental health or overall health as an area of expertise. So in terms of that, then mental health and overall health equity services, what steps do people in here think what steps need to be taken for reform?
I think it doesn't matter what you call it. For the very reasons that Akul mentioned.
Okay.
But if you're doing the work, it becomes evident, right? We have laws in place that state you cannot discriminate against a person because of their fill in the blank. But people are still discriminated against every single day. So it doesn't matter if there's a law in place. It doesn't matter if there's a policy in place. It matters what the person is doing and does in that space where they have control, where they have whatever level of responsibility they have to do the work. You can justify, like, let's not play games, right? You can justify not hiring someone. Be creative. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to give you the words. So it doesn't, yes, we need the laws. Yes, we need the policies. It also doesn't matter what you call it, because the work still needs to be done. And so from a government perspective, when I'm hiring people, we have civil service rules in place. Those exams are antiquated exams to the point where we have questions that say things like, and I'm paraphrasing, because you also can't have a copy of your exam to be able to, like, the system works the way it's supposed to. So let me just use this example of the civil service exam. We have an administrative assistant exam, and this is 2024. One of the questions references floppy disks and alphanumeric keyboards and tape drives.
Cringe.
Show me where, right? Even in a government building where they don't replace anything, show me where they are using floppy disks, alphanumeric keyboards, and tape drives, right?
Throwback.
So, but
Courtney, do you know what a floppy disk is?
I'm a grown woman.
right? And so the system works, but it works the way it's supposed. So how then does someone study? They're studying to learn terminology, language. It's all in English, which is a whole nother conversation. But it's not the same English. So I still have to hire someone who has learned how to navigate and work the system versus someone who's best for the job. So talk about didn't earn it. What are we talking about people earning?
Meritocracy.
Their ability to study a test from 1972.
Right.
One of the questions on my exam said something like, it's in the 80s, higher education, something about gender, women being, enrolling into higher education. And the question was in, what can we, based upon this data that we have from the 80s, presume will happen in the 90s. 30 years ago, I can tell you what happened. Right. So are you asking me what happened?
Right.
Or are you asking me what I think y'all thought would happen when you wrote this in the early 80s?
Right.
The system works the way it's built to. And so even when we talk about segregation, we don't erase this issue if white people move into the east side. Like that doesn't erase the issue. There's nothing wrong with groups of people living together. So if people want to live with a group of white people, do that. If black folks want to live together in a group of black folks, do that. If Indian people want to live together in a group do that. That is not the type of segregation I'm talking about. We're talking about a lack of resources. We're talking about specifically taking resources away from organizations and from communities that have earned those resources. We cannot erase, we cannot reform, we cannot make things better if we're uncomfortable having tough conversations,
Absolutely.
if we're uncomfortable talking about race. I work in health equity, which is different than diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I get emails all the time. Well, where do we find black people? I don't know. You asking me because I'm black?
Right.
Right.
It's true. That's true.
But I don't know. Well, where we want to, work in the LGBTQIA community. Where are they? Gay people. Where y'all at? Like, what exactly?
What are we doing?
Right.
What are we
You know what I'm
doing?
saying? We have to see people as human. We're human.
Right.
And the people are where the people are. And so my work is centered, my government work is centered on health outcomes. The health outcomes state that black folks are 300% more likely to be hospitalized because of diabetes, implications of diabetes, than their white counterparts. It has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with the data. If it said tall people are 300% more likely to be hospitalized, the two of us would be in trouble. Not because we're black, but because we're the tallest in the room.
Right.
And so we have to look past the issues, the isms, and address the humanity. When we look at health and black maternal health, it's a big topic in the US. The issue is not black maternal health. The issue is maternal health, which in the United States is abysmal.
True.
And the issue is racism. When you put maternal health and racism together, you have a black maternal health problem. You can't address black maternal health. You have to address maternal health, and you have to address racism. So what words are we using? How are we having that conversation? I am blessed to live in a body, a space that you cannot see my disabilities. You don't know what issues I bring to the table unless I tell you what I'm dealing with. Right, so unless we have that conversation, like I shouldn't have to out myself at a table to be like, I represent this group, that group, this group, and that group. I represent Kelly Marie. I don't know what all the black women think. I don't know what all the queer women think. I don't know what all the neurodivergent people think. I don't know what all the hearing impaired people think. I wear glasses. My son says all the time, these people walking around with glasses, walking around, seeing for free. We have now gotten to a place where wearing glasses is commonplace, but once upon a time, it was a disability.
Right.
Like you couldn't be hired, you couldn't be functioning, lock you away, because my lens curves differently than someone else's. Now it's commonplace. So we have to be able to have those tough conversations at one point. So I'll just leave it there.
But that conversation is necessary. The difficult conversations don't get to happen because of the niceties or the politeness, or I don't want to be looked at this way, or after I have that conversation at the lunch table with Becky and Shaniqua says something out the way. Now we can't have this conversation. Oh, did you hear what she said?
Right.
No. We need to be in that room. We need to have a seat at the table, first of all, for the conversations to happen, as well as the conversation needs to be happening. And it needs to be just as raw, because see, here's the thing. In my community, we've been told no many times without reason. Okay? We've been told that it's not for us. We can't make it there. Civil service is one of those things. A lot of us are taking those tests, but we're not meeting or rising to the top 3 to be selected for those jobs. And so we don't appear in those areas where it would be beneficial for one of us to help that person on the other side of the desk to get to what that thing that they need. You know, it's so odd that you said something about the civil service. The things that this process does, I get it that it was a necessity then, but the reform is let's go back, let's review it and bring it current so that it can actually benefit society. I think that we're having conversations in back rooms and making deals and then coming to the forefront and showing the public like, look, we've talked, but it's not changing anything. But the awakening has happened, so now those difficult questions are being asked, and some people, people are being called to the carpet as to what do you plan to do? Government, teaching, all of these things have been long overdue for address.
Sophia, I'm interested in what you might think as well in terms, because the space that you work in is in terms of a community with developmental disabilities.
Yeah.
What reforms have you seen, or what nedes to happen?
Well, I think there's so much in this conversation. There's so much in my mind right now about this, and I think when it comes, my community is people with developmental disabilities, very significant disabilities, and one of the things the thoughts that's coming to my mind in this conversation, because civil service, it is really interesting that you brought up civil service, because we work in that area a little bit, and one of the things that's coming up in my mind is that people, with certain kind of first of all, disability is not always included in DEI, right? So that's something that we would like to see, because it's a part of human diversity. Yeah. It is a part of, it's not just a medical thing, it's a natural thing. Right. There are disabilities that are natural. The people with disabilities have always existed in every human configuration throughout time. Right. So it's natural. But I think when you really include people, I think sometimes people get invited and it's just, they want you to be exactly the same as the non-disabled, white male, and if you are actually including people, it will change you. The people that I am around all the time do have significant disabilities. No, they do not work at the same pace as a person without that kind of disability. And so we need, I think the change that makes to actually, not just you're here and you have to work to this way, and in this way, you have to speak this way, you have to work in this way, you have to be something that you actually are not. You're not actually including that person, and you're not getting the benefit of what would happen if you did. It can be pretty radical in a good way, because, even, I'm around people who cannot speak, and they cannot eat by themselves, they cannot feed themselves, and people might question why do they exist? And when you're actually in that community with that person, you see, and you see what they bring, and it's not productivity, it's not the things that we have kind of made. We have this very limited benchmarks for intelligence, for worth, for success, for value, and those things we will benefit as a society if we really look at those and allow that to change us, because in a business maybe productivity is important, maybe profit is important, is kindness important? In your environment, in your work environment, is that something that we're looking at? I think it is. I think it is for all the things that we always do look at in business or in other measurements that we have. Who's bringing that? How is that there? It's not as measurable, but I think it's very valuable. And I just think on a lot of different aspects of diversity, it's not it's not a superficial thing, you know, that you're and I think we will benefit if we can actually include it, not just on a superficial level or a token level. That I think that happens in our community a lot, you know.
The resiliency of a people, your group with disabilities, as well as the African American community, you know, you're constantly, there's barriers constantly put up. There's a barrier you got to get over. There's some way you got to get around it. You can't take the test. You can't, you know, enter here. You can't have this. You can't have that. But we always seem to work twice as harder, and we get there, and we show that time and time again, there is worth, there is value, and we should be seen. We should be given the same opportunities. My mother used to say, you keep barring us out, but we keep getting in. You keep finding a way in, you keep barring us out, but you keep finding a way in. And that's the resiliency. That's the reform.
But I think it's humanity too, right? That's what inclusivity brings to the table, is our own humanity. We are facing you know, things that challenge us as human beings, things that challenge us as citizens of the world, our own households, our, you know, where we live in Buffalo on the east side. But having that inclusivity brings the perspective, it brings the empathy, it brings all of those things that make us human to the table, and forces us to kind of take stock of ourselves. Again, that sort of really, really big microscope that you're going to put yourself underneath. You look at it and you're just like, okay, if I am including everyone, how does that change me? Does it change me? Do I want it to change me? And maybe the answer to all those things is yes. But one has to also be open to it, right? You can't, if you're completely closed off and not wanting to, or you think that DEI are very bad letters when put together, or whatever, you won't want any part of that. But that's our humanity that's there. They are the best of us, and we should have a space for everyone there.
I think one of the examples, because when you think about DEI, you know, some folks will put an A in there for accessibility, and there's a lot of, you know, belonging is another word that's coming up, justice is another conversation as well, but it makes me think of the curb cut effect that came from the American for Disabilities Act. And so when you think about reform from that standpoint, you know, curb cut, you think about the sidewalks and the curb cut that was created, it came out of ADA, but it was also something that solve for a lot of different problems, right? So if you had a physical disability, it was a way that you can get on the sidewalk. Maybe you're using a motorized chair or, you know, something like that. Or, you know, I love to travel. I'm taking my suitcase, I'm using that curb cut. If I'm pushing a stroller, I'm using that curb cut. If I'm unpacking a dolly, I'm doing the same thing. And so when you solve for those that are most disenfranchised in a process, that's generally how everybody else benefits from that, right? And so when we think about it from an accessibility standpoint, that's a perfect example. And we have to think about that through a lot of different means and measures, right? How do we solve for those who have the most difficulty? Because it really will free up that process. And that came from, you know, a change at that level.
In regard to mental health, there is an example that is used often when explaining trauma about how two people can be in the same car and experience a car accident, and one person can have a traumatic experience to it, the other person cannot. But what I don't think that we always talk about is that the person who was standing at the bus stop can watch that accident and have a traumatic experience as well. They can say, I am now afraid to ride in vehicles because I've seen something that has happened to these individuals. And I don't think that that's being taken into consideration collectively as a community as we are trying to heal. And I think that there are people, as has been brought up earlier, there was only one store before, there's only one store after. So regardless of whether you're okay and you can go back into that store and it's fine for you, you're traumatized and you have no option. And I think the biggest thing with reform is delivering of options, having it so that there is availability for people to decide how they want to navigate certain things. And I think that there has been a big push or conversation, I'll just say conversation around mental health, especially since this event and the traumatic experience that everyone has had at Buffalo, Western New York, Erie County. And what I don't want to happen is our experience to be pathologized through the outside view. And I don't want that to happen at all. And I think that is something that we need to make sure that we are cognizant of and when we're having these conversations. And I think the biggest thing, and with speaking to reform, that collectively can happen in this area is that the higher powers can stop gaslighting the east side of Buffalo. They can just do the stuff that they've been saying they're going to do for forever, and that would make improvements. They have been talking about revitalizing Jefferson Avenue since I was a child. I am 35 years old now. Where's that? I am proud. Last name is Copeland. My great-grandfather owned Copeland Tires on Jefferson. Like, our family was a part of when Jefferson was bustling. And there are grant funds for businesses that the people are asking, where's the money? There's home revitalization projects and people are asking, where's the money? There are all of these different things that they're saying. They made so much conversation about how there was only one grocery store and how the area is experiencing food apartheid. There's still only one store. I think that reform could really just be, hey, can y'all do what y'all been said y'all was going to do? That would be helpful before we even get to how we get to after May 14th. Can we get to what y'all have been promising and saying that you were going to do for the community, period, in the first place? That would be helpful. It's hard to grow in a community if you can't trust the government that is leading you, or the supports that are supposed to be there for you if they're operating against you.
You're listening to What's Next, and I am joined in the studio today by 6 individuals who are all officially trailblazers. They were named as Living Trailblazing Women by the Erie County Commission on the Status of Women, and I think after hearing from each of them, we can see why, and you can hear why. Thank you, all of you. Let's do a little gear change now. We've already touched on this. We're talking about reform. This is the focus of this episode. We've spoken about education. We've spoken about the conversations happening. And that leads to people being perhaps a little bit more informed or educated about certain experiences, perspectives, history, for example. Does that play a part for any of you in getting buy-in and anything that needs changing? It doesn't have to be the workplace. It can be anything.
In getting buy-in, I think there's a lot of this group against that group. If we all got the same common goal, why can't we all come to the table? One of the things that happens in society is people see one group doing something, and why can't we do it? We need to be able to come together and organize. But it always seems to get to the point where there's too many chiefs, not enough Indians, real boots on the ground doing the actual work. People show up for the photo op, and then they're gone.
Just snip the ribbon.
Just snip the ribbon, and then they're gone. The real work comes with not only setting it up, but sustaining it. Making sure that what the plan was when we came up with it is what's being carried out. So many times, so many hands are in the pot, and so many deals have been struck in the back room that the real actual work and the actual funding never actually gets to where it needs to be to actually make that happen, okay? Oftentimes we see something needs to happen, but you feel like nobody's gonna listen to me, With that 514, even before 514, just COVID. During COVID, we had a lot of riots. We had a bunch of different things going on. There was so much tension. So many people fighting for all different things, okay? You had a lot of race issues. So again, they organized peacefully, they were still shot down, still knocked down. It was everywhere, just discord, discomfort, our people are tired. And so now with the 514, at that particular point, I feel like people are like, enough is enough. They're tired and they want some answers. We need to have these conversations. People need to be held accountable. People need to be held accountable for the promises, and not only the promises, but some answers to the problems that have come from a lot of this stuff.
So are you specifically talking about people that like politicians, for
example? Politicians, store owners. I mean, for example, there's a Tops.
Yeah.
In where's Wegmans? Usually they're in pairs, or each community has at least a choice of what they can do. Tops stepped out there, and it was some talk during that time frame that maybe they wouldn't rebuild this Tops. But the thought process was that if we don't rebuild this Tops or reopen this Tops, what are they going to have? I mean, if they go away, there's nothing. You have a Sam's Club and you have a BJ's, but they're on the outskirts. If there's besides, who's going to go to these stores where you buy in bulk and travel on the bus? Well, how many items are you going to be able to really carry?
Right.
There's no shuttling or anything like that. That was going on then, but I think that's kind of dissipated now. Okay, Wegmans. Is there a place for Wegmans to be at? Wegmans is one of the top companies to work for, one of the Fortune 5,500, what have you. Have they been asked to come to the table? We don't get to necessarily know that. We don't know what that conversation is. Yes, this is not something that can happen overnight, but there's a conversation that necessarily needs to happen. Can a Sam's Club or BJ's be built in that area where these people could possibly utilize it, where they don't have to have the issue of the transportation? Is there some type of subsidiary that can come and be? Is there a plan? I mean, these questions are arising, but they're not being answered.
I think to some, yes, and right. Like first, I'll say it. Tops, and there is an Aldi's. There is also whatever that store is on Bailey in Kensington, Imperial something. There are smaller food options available. Are there grocery stores in the sense that a Wegmans is no?
No.
Let me also say, while Tops was the only store, it wasn't like it was a good Tops. Like, let's not pretend like Tops they had more beer than vegetables. So let's not pretend, we have to have the difficult conversations,
We have to have
right?
a difficult conversation.
Let's not pretend that Tops was the great savior. We are a capitalist society. So a business is gonna go where the money is. Until that changes, a business is going to go where the money is, right? Tesla ain't making no money down the street. They only open as long as the subsidies exist, right? As soon as the money is gone, the doors will close. Why? Because there's no market for what this is a capitalist society. So let's call it what it is. I think places of growth that we as community, like everyday community members, not director but if we come together as community members, and I go and shop at the Bengali grocery store or the African grocery store because there's a little small African grocery store, and pour into them, they will go and stock the thing I want because they know I'm gonna come and buy it, right? We, I believe, as community members, need to adjust our perspective. First of all, you don't want to be here. I don't want you here. You close. We're not going to stop. We'll figure it out, like we always have.
Resiliency.
Right. So a part of that is who are we, and what do we want, and what are we willing to support. Laws have to change. Rules have to change. You know. I have the privilege of not having to shop at that Tops, and I have not been in there since the massacre. Most people don't have that option in that area.
In that area.
I went there to support Tops because that's no longer my community, physical community. The good paying government job actually did not allow me to find a place to live in the community I wanted to live in, which is a whole nother conversation. So I now live in a space where I can afford to live. It's not the east side of Buffalo. But to keep us on track and on point, if we look at larger cities, how many large box grocery stores are in New York? Not many. Those folks are not going to that fancy Wegmans that has opened, that is a tourist attraction in New York, right? They're shopping at the bodega. They're shopping at the cart that has the vegetables that are fresh. Like there are other options available, and we need to begin looking at what we need in order to survive versus what people say we need because they have it. Yes, there's a Wegmans and a Tops and a BJ's and a whatever on Sheridan and that. Let them have y'all go ahead and shop there. Here is what this community needs. If Wegmans opens up, who's gonna shop there, right? But if the co-op, not Lexington, but the African Heritage Food Co-op, or another option opens, will we keep it open? Right, and so it's, the system works exactly the way it was built. So unless we're looking at the system, which is capitalism and manifest destiny and all things American, we are not actually addressing the problem. Everything else will be a Band-Aid. It's either a little Band-Aid or a big Band-Aid, but it is just a Band-Aid.
I was just going to add to that too. I think you're talking about system change, and I think there's a lot of conversations that need to happen around system changes because we don't know what that looks like. We're all living and operating within the current system, right? And so there are a lot of conversations, I would say, even from different organizations that are saying enough of addressing the symptoms. We know how to do that. We've done that well. We need to change the system, which means policies need to change. The framework needs to change for how we operate. And I would say that there's a couple different things that come to mind. One of those, because you asked around, like, how do you create buy-in? Relationships, right? Connecting to people, building trust is a lot of different ways that you can start to build buy-in, because now I'm going to be empathetic to your circumstance, right? Because I know you, I have a relationship with you, and that's something that we often talk about in the work that we do. But there's another concept, as we think about paradigm shifts that need to happen within this space and work, and targeted universalism is something that continues to come up, right? And what targeted universalism is, it comes out of Berkeley. It's a framework of saying everyone is situated differently, right? We know everyone is situated differently. We talked about physical disabilities, other developmental disabilities, race-based things, gender-based things, sexual orientation. But at the end of the day, if we say, and Kim, you were starting to get to this, right? Like, there's a universal goal. What do we want to happen? People have access to healthcare, for instance. We can't just say, okay, everyone has health insurance and that's going to cure things, because think about people who are in a rural community. You can have health insurance, but if it's 100 and 150 miles away from my house, that doesn't really do me any good. So we need to, because they're situated differently, address that problem for them, right? And so even when it comes to, you gave some examples. In New York City, bodegas are the way that they do that, right? So maybe we need to think about a different means of people getting healthy, foods and vegetables in their community. But what that does is it starts to kind of get rid of some of this political, pressure, because when you say, oh, I'm going to do something for this specific group, somebody else says, oh, well, what about me? What about me? But if we say, hey, we want everyone to have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, it just means that we're going to have to get to it in a different way because you live in the city, you live in a rural community. We can start to address it from that lens. So this is a different framework that a lot of folks, locally are starting to talk about. What do we do to address people being situated differently and getting everyone to a universal goal of access?
So, Courtney, do you feel optimistic about the reforms that have happened or that could happen?
I am not about the ones that have happened, but I am very optimistic about the ones that could potentially happen because I have so much faith in the east side of Buffalo, in that community, and I know the people of that community, and that, like you said before, they can try to barricade you out, but we're going to get our way in either way. So we're going to be all right.
And Kura?
I'm definitely optimistic. I think that there's a lot of conversations that have shifted towards what we're, discussing. People knowing that the old way of doing things needs to change, right? And I think in these moments, and I think we all talked about this at the Erie County Status of Women, but looking back, right, looking at our ancestry and looking where we came from and standing on their shoulders to move things forward. So always optimistic.
Kelly Marie?
Nope. But here's why. Because as long as we are basing our work off of a moral imperative, we're not going to succeed. Some people don't care. And so we have to find the things, back to buy-in, find the things that makes that person tick. I can make a business case for equity. I can make a business case for healthcare. Or, I can come the moral imperative route, but
Doesn't seem to work so far.
Yeah.
right? Like, we don't want people to die, but they're still dying.
Right.
We having the same conversations. So no,
Still a Humboldt Parkway issue. We still talking about that?
Right. Yes. No. So until we transition past this, we should be better people. No, we don't have. There's nothing that says we have to be good, better people. Like, no. Short answer.
Kimberly, are you optimistic or no?
I am optimistic because I'm always optimistic. I think that we are in a spot, and if we take advantage of the powers that be and hold some people's feet to the fire, we should be able to turn some things around. Some things. We got a lot of work to do, though.
Sophia?
Yeah, well, I have to say that these brilliant women in this room and this conversation makes me feel happier and more hopeful. And I often think about, the founders of the organization that I work for were institutionalized. That's a very different life than the life that people with disabilities are having now. And that's within, 35 years. So I always think about that to help me feel like we go forward and we go back, but we do go forward. Things are different even if everything is not different, and we have to keep pushing. I just don't think we can give up. I don't think we should.
Right.
Yeah.
And Bridget?
Oh, me. Yes. As journalists, it's very easy to get disheartened. We see, we read, we hear a lot of humanity doing the worst things to one another. And it can take a toll on how you feel about your fellow man or woman or child or whatever. I, however, am hopeful. I'm hopeful for several reasons. One, I have to be, or else I'd be out of a job. I have to hope that reform will come. But honestly, it is the conversations that I've had with people or heard on our air in the last 2 years that have made me still have hope. Primarily because it means as long as we're having conversations with people, people are still talking about the issues. And as long as they're talking about the issues, we can work on it. It's when everybody stops talking and goes away in their corners that we can't really fix anything. So yeah, I have hope.
Well, thank you to every single one of you for being here and for the frank and fantastic conversation that we've had today. This is What's Next. I'm Holly Kirkpatrick. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.